My name is Ken Walker. I'm a taxidermist. I live out in Alberta Beach. I was born and raised in Edmonton. Been interested in Sasquatches since I was a kid. I went through this phase when I was young, you know, where I clipped the newspaper articles about the dam incidents and things. And like most people, you know, most kids that are into it, as I grew up, I realized that, oh no, this can't possibly be. And, you know, they would have found one by now. They would have told me more. They would have done this. They. And many years later, I was faced with a couple of anecdotes from very good friends whom I know were not lying. And so I slowly started opening myself up to the possibility. But I've always been kind of a driven person, so if there's one out there, I'm gonna find it, right? So yeah, then I started just within the hunting community, which I have a pretty good repertoire with hunters, as being an award-winning taxidermist. I've won the world championships 3 times. I do work for the Fish and Wildlife and people like that, you know, so I know these people personally, and they know me. They know I'm not a crackpot. So I've been able to get access to people and accounts that a lot of people would never get. And you have to remember too, being a taxidermist, you're like the hairdresser of the woods, right? You know, the hairdressers hear all the good rumors. Taxidermists are like that too. I mean, rich people, they won't take calls from half their business associates, but they'll always take a call from their taxidermist, you know? So yeah, I've been privy to a lot of investigations. So I you know, about 10 years ago, I started seriously looking into this matter. And what I have found, I think, is astounding. I was hunting bears on the old Simpson Timber Road out of Blue Ridge. You know, you go to Blue Ridge, you go down, pass through Blue Ridge, you cross the river, and then you take the first left. Now that used to be the only road. They called it the Simpson Timber Road. We used to hunt bears on that when I was, oh man, when I was a kid, 16, 17 years old. And the thing is that, well, I'm 55 now, so I'll give you an idea how long ago that was. And we were driving down that road, and something ran across the road. And my buddy with me actually said, "Is that a Sasquatch?" And I said, "No, it was a man. No such thing as a Sasquatch." But what ran across the road was dressed all in black. It was quite far, and it was acting very, very afraid. But there was a long sloping hill that went from, like, it ran from left to right, from my perspective. So he, when it ran up the hill, it didn't slow down. Even bears don't do that. Everything that runs uphill tends to slow down. This thing didn't. And I thought, who is this guy? And I thought, well, there has to be a cut line there because he hit the bush going 30 miles an hour. So when I got up there, there was no cut line. So he hit solid bush. And it always stuck with me over the years because it just didn't make sense. All these years later, from what I know now, it makes far more sense that it was a Sasquatch than it being a person. Now, that being saying, I know Sasquatches are real. I know too many people who've seen them. I do know people who've shot them. And yeah, so I've had a lot of people come through my shop, and most of the accounts that I hear, you know, more or less sworn not to repeat them just because people want nothing to do with it. I very much like to talk to people, not who want to see a Sasquatch, but who don't want to see one and claim they saw it, because it's a big difference between the whole thing. Well, I think I saw one. Oh yeah, I did see one. No, they're saying, I don't know what I saw and I wish I'd never seen it because now I'm scared to go in the woods. Those sort of anecdotes in the hunting community. And hunters are the best witnesses because even though they can't tell you what they saw, they can tell you what they didn't see. You know, the most common thing I hear was, it wasn't a bear. It wasn't a bear. You know, when I think about what I saw, I mean, it was far. Like, it was 300-400 yards at least in front of me. I mean, too far to actually see if it was covered in hair. But it was uniform color from the top of his head to the bottom of his feet, you know, from what I could see. And it ran. If you've ever seen the famous Memorial Day footage, that's exactly what I saw. You know, something running scared. And, you know, I got this sense of fear from the whole thing, the way it was acting, and I also got this sense of, get to those trees no matter what it takes. Now, it didn't seem to be all that big, okay, because I was thinking, well, if that's some dude, out here, because right away you think poacher, right? If that's some dude poaching, all he had to do is stay in the trees and let me drive by. Doesn't make sense. But now if I think about it, and I think, what if it is a younger one? Well, before I crested that hill, I didn't see the bigger one cross the road. And the little one panicked and ran to catch up to the one I didn't see. Now that makes a lot of sense, because in the majority of good film and good cases, there's usually young ones involved. The Patterson footage, people don't know the story behind that, but they were tracking 3, her and 2 small ones. And yet she walked through the middle of an open clearing. And they do know from following the track she came back that night to pick up the one she hid. She was basically walking through that clearing to lead them away from the one she stashed. Like a bird dragging a broken wing, or a fake broken wing, to get you away from a nest. A lot of the anecdotes I hear where Sasquatches make big mistakes, almost every single one has to do with a young one. Even the Justin Smeya shooting, which I was the first one to talk to him about that. And he did shoot 2 Sasquatches, no two ways about it. Especially since, and I've talked to him since, he's a reasonable guy, So I mean, that's about the only time you'll see them making mistakes, is when they have young and inexperienced ones that they're trying to take control of. And if you read through the BFRO reports, there's a lot of Sasquatches and young ones that compromise themselves one way or another.
You have to see this here. I won't cut the camera off. I'll just point it over there to show you. So all the way on the other side of the river there, that tree fell over and landed directly on top of that tree that's sticking up, that half tree. It's sitting on top of it, making a perfect T structure. Like, what are the odds of that? That it's just sitting there like that? That's very strange. Highly unlikely, but it happened. So, weird things can happen out in nature. If it is natural, maybe something did put that tree on top of that one there. There's not very good odds that it would fall and land and just be resting there like that and not roll off. It's a full-size tree almost. Very strange. Right now it's hovering between -15 and -18 degrees Celsius. The last video I made, the last documentary, people were saying that it wasn't actually as cold as I said it was because you couldn't see my breath. But, I can't see my breath right now. And I know how cold it is. Look at my beard, you can tell. Even though the sun's shining, it can still get pretty cold. And in Alberta, -15, -18 is normal. Throughout the winter. That's an average temperature. It's not unusual at all.
You know, everybody says they want to find where there's a Sasquatch, you know. And I was, in the very beginning, I thought that they were just a big lumbering monster that lived in, you know, deep woods somewhere. I've since come to the realization a long time ago that's not true. Sasquatch is basically anywhere that he wants to go. Now, obviously, they're going to be a lot safer in a remote area, and that's has something to do with how they winter. They get themselves in very remote areas for the winter. But for some reason or another, historically, they like mountains. They like steep terrain. You know, they seem to like places where people can't go. Almost everything about their whole existence is staying away from us. They're self-aware, you know. From what I've talked to people who've been up close to live ones and dead ones, they have told me the same thing, and that is that they are a hominid. They're not an animal. So you're not dealing with an animal. You're not. If there was an animal, I would have stuck one for the museum already. I can assure you. There's a lot of people who've seen them at the distance and just automatically assumed, like I did, that they're another person. But if you start getting into the morphology and things, you can understand that they're not. So they tend to be they tend to be along riverways and in remote areas, and they're also very nocturnal. They find strategic places to set themselves up during the day, and they see extremely well at night, and they're a nocturnal animal. We're a daytime critter, and they're a nighttime critter. You know, and if you compromise their area where they are, they, depending on the area, but they kind of go off the radar. They leave the area. Once this animal is officially discovered and recognized, we're going to learn that there's a lot about them that will amaze us. Like off the chart things, like adaptations that they've evolved that we didn't see coming or couldn't figure out. You know, there's always a reason for anything to be secretive or reclusive. I hunt trophy whitetails. Okay. Yes, everybody, I'm one of those bad trophy hunters. I'll admit it. That means I don't kill very many animals, right? If I was eating them, I'd kill them all. But I don't. I just kill the ones that I want. So I might go 5 years without getting a deer. Now, these big deer usually been shot at. So they're nocturnal. And the only time I can catch them is when they're chasing does in the springtime, or in the fall time, I should say, November. So they have to make a mistake, and they usually don't. So the Sasquatch, if it's a hominid, it's very important to remember that at one time in the world, there was I think it was 6 species, separate species of hominid. Okay, and now there's only one recognized species of hominid, and that's Homo sapien. Now they do know that if you're not African through DNA, you're a hybrid species. We are, if you're a white person, you're at least 5% Neanderthal. Our skin gene and our hair gene is Neanderthal. That's why our skin's white and our hair's straight. And I believe Asian and North American native cultures have even more. And there's another hominid that's not been identified that is also in the mix-up of our DNA. But we're pretty much Homo sapien. Okay, but you stop and think about, if there were 6 species of hominid and now there's 1. If there's anything that's in our nature, it is that we do not tolerate anything like us. Okay, I mean, it's bad enough we don't tolerate each other if we look different or if we speak different. We are very, very well known for killing each other. So the only hominid that could have survived alongside of us would have been one that adapted to hide. It makes perfect sense that if there is another hominid out there, its sole purpose of survival is to hide from us. It's the only thing that makes sense. All the other ones didn't, and they're dead. They're gone. There was no, they couldn't adapt. There was, they couldn't adapt to us burning the forest down just to get 3 of them, you know. That's how we think. We're very good at wiping things out, especially people.
The sun's going down quickly, and it's getting a lot colder. Look at this. It's freezing. So I'm just trying to get the shelter wrapped up and get the fire going, and then I'll be collecting firewood. And hopefully I can get some food in me. I brought some stew, some other snacks. I am going to have a cup of coffee too, because I don't intend to fall asleep early. I am going to stay up as late as I can to see, you know, if anything comes around the camp, or if I can hear anything. Or it's going to be kind of tricky, you know, because the river's right behind me. It's going to be harder to hear the sounds that aren't as pronounced. You know, the river's going to mask a lot of that. So if you can see behind me, kind of, I'm just getting the spruce boughs put down, trying to make a nice comfy bed in front of me. The beginnings of a fire. I gotta collect a lot more wood for the night, but just gonna get the bed made up with the spruce boughs and then throw my tarp on top. And I'll be done. Then I can relax for a bit, have some food, have that coffee. It is a mortal sin, I know, but I brought instant coffee. I actually don't mind the taste, but I'm probably gonna go to hell for it. Finally able to take a little break. I think my stew is almost ready to eat. I got it on a little MSR burner here, just to save some time. Cool smoke effects, right? CGI. I got some CGI smoke effects. I got out here pretty late, like 3 p.m. and you know, I didn't start building my shelter till, I don't know, like 4:30ish. And now it's dark out and it's creepy out. And usually when it gets dark out, it gets creepy out wherever you go. I can occasionally hear the ice on the river cracking, and the sound that it makes is almost like a tree knock. So when I first heard it, I was like, what the heck is that? And then I heard it again and I could tell it was right at the river. The history of Sasquatch in this Nordegg area is just insane. There are so many accounts way back to the early 1900s and before that. And, you know, a lot of it goes on near the Forestry Trunk Road, off of the Forestry Trunk Road. And the crazy thing is that you don't have to be in a super remote area to have an experience. You know, you can be in a campground. A lot of these things happen at campgrounds. They just walk right in and start messing with people. I think that's very interesting. No signs of anything yet. All I can hear is the wind. No howls. Nothing. Sometimes I don't know why I do this shit. Okay, that was a weird sound. I don't know if that picked up on camera. Came from this direction. When I'm walking around, I'm trying to get in the habit of aiming. What the fuck was that? Okay, I actually just heard something. My heart is racing. I can hear an airplane now. As I was saying, I'm trying to get in the habit of keeping the camera aimed in front of me in case something crosses my path or is there. Then I'll get it on camera.
There has been a DNA study, okay, and a lot of people like poo-poo it and say, oh, you know, Melba Ketchum's DNA study. That's not true. The DNA study is real, okay. And you have to remember that, you know, for GenBank not to recognize it, that didn't come from scientists. That came from lawyers. Think about that for a minute, okay. I knew Richard Substat. He worked on the study. I knew him personally. Unfortunately, he passed away of cancer, but he was a very cool guy, and he didn't believe in Sasquatches until he was involved in that study. And he told me that the mitochondrial DNA of the Sasquatch, at least the samples they tested, was human, which is carried by the mother. And of course, now with what they know about DNA, he said that the DNA was particular to an area in Europe that was cut off by ice 30,000 years ago. So the Sasquatch is probably a hybrid species. Well, according to their study, it's a hybrid species. Much the same we are. Now, the thing to remember about a hybrid species is every true species is environment specific. In other words, it's the environment that gives rise to the species. You know, you got the weasel family, okay? Pine marten is a weasel, okay? It lives in trees, but not any trees. It has to be old growth forest because they have 3% body fat. So they have to sleep in rotting logs. So it has to be old growth forest, okay? An otter is a weasel. Lives in the water, catches fish. Can't climb trees, right? It's a weasel, but it's shaped by its environment, okay? Now, if you were to cross a marten and a weasel, you would have an animal that could live almost anywhere. And so when you have people that are of a hybrid species, suddenly you have Inuit living in the most inhospitable place in the world. You have you know, people living in cold countries, up mountains, all over the place. So like a mule deer is a hybrid species. You got mule deer in the desert. You got them in the mountains. You got them in the parklands. You got them in the prairies. There's mule deer for almost every environment because the environment didn't give rise to the species. The species just adapted to other environments. So the Sasquatch, being a hybrid species, would mean that doesn't matter where it is, it can thrive as long as it can think. They have the ability to be extremely dangerous. I also believe they're predatory. I believe firmly that if this is something that is symbiotic with nature, and it is a hunter, there's no two ways about it, it hunts, then there has to be situations where they have taken people. There has to be. Well, the natives talked about it constantly. But they are also smart enough to know that there's consequences to such a thing. Because I'm sure if they've ever grabbed somebody, all of a sudden the forests are full of people looking for them. You know, that's learned behavior. I think that upon discovery, there's going to be some very, very hard questions that are going to need to be answered. Because, well, there's a whole network of books called the Missing 411 books that talk about missing people in the forest, and the way it reads is a cover-up. But if the animal exists, and I know it does, and that's the only thing you could do if you're trying to hide its existence. So I think, like I said, there's some hard questions that'll have to be answered. Because there are a lot of people that wouldn't take their children in the woods if they knew the thing existed. So there's some liability there. And that could also be another reason for keeping it quiet. I think that there is, upon discovery, there will be some liability. This is a recreation of a Sasquatch based on the measurements taken from the Patterson film stills. So basically what's in that film is what you see here. According to, I made my own measurement chart from the actual foot, and I compared it to John Green's, and it's the same. It's always been kind of a pet project of mine to try and recreate one. I'd like to work further on it. There's supposed to be trees on here, things like that, you know. But this is basically, I've had a lot of witnesses come in and say this is what they look like, so it's been kind of a fun project, you know. I also use this thing to smoke out potential witnesses, you know. If they laugh at it, I know they've never seen one. If they get all weird and they walk away, then I know they've seen one, so then I can talk to them, right? So it's an icebreaker. I think that when you're talking about an encounter being terrifying, it's pretty subjective because I believe that they can actually manipulate electromagnetic fields, you know, like the dogs do it. Wolf packs is the only way they communicate. They know which one is going to do what when they're hunting. They're not, otherwise it'd be just chaos. I think that the Sasquatch has taken it to a level so far beyond, like the same level we've taken making sounds, turned it into language and music and art and everything else. I think that they've taken the whole electromagnetic energy thing to that other level. And I think that as soon as you're into a situation where you're close to one, you will experience a very unreasonable amount of fear. Okay? So almost every time you're close to one, it's a terrifying experience. A lot of people think that it's haunted or think there's ghosts or whatever. Like they got a bad feeling, you know, demons, blah, blah, blah. But I think that I talked to one young hunter when he was young. He said a big one tried to grab him. He says he fired 3 shots to turn it. It ran across a clearing towards him screaming, and he was just a kid. He fired 3 shots, and he was visibly shaken just telling the story. Like he started to relive it. It was almost like I guess what you would describe a PTSD encounter to be, you know. And I had to calm him down almost, you know. And I think that was an interesting account because he was just a kid and he was on a river walk with his gun. And they have a creature watching him that reasons out that that's a young person, and I'll bet you they'll think he was just lost if I grab him. Because that's what would have happened. They would have said, oh, poor kid. We knew we shouldn't have let him go off on his own. You know, he got himself lost. No. There's people in Alberta, backpackers, that backpack around the world. They didn't so much as find a matchstick from their backpack. Everything's gone. Gone, like just vanished, you know. In areas where I know, well, the BFR will tell you there's Sasquatches in those areas. So, although I think that it's extremely rare, I think that they can be very dangerous.
You can see behind me here there's a tree break. I have to admit I'm not huge on this tree break thing. I have seen weird tree structures, and you know, you'll find branch twisting and stranger things than just branch breaking. Like it doesn't mean a whole lot to me. Apparently the Sasquatch will break branches at certain heights or whatever to mark their territory or to mark trails or to let you know that they're there. I can't buy that just because there are so many trees and broken trees and deadfall naturally that I personally just toss this stuff out. I don't know, unless I see something where it's like consistent, where the trees are snapped and it's one after the other and they're all perfectly at the same height and in the same direction, then I might start thinking, oh, okay, this is kind of weird. But when you find branches like this, I mean, this thing's like 8 feet, 8.5 feet tall. It's the right height, right, for a Sasquatch. But I don't, it doesn't mean anything to me. I'm sorry to say. It's a clean break, you know, they say, oh, it's a clean break, like the hands just grabbed it right up there and snapped it, but there are so many other things out here that can break branches, and these trees are just exposed to the elements 24/7 for hundreds of years. Like, there's better pieces of evidence out there. The tree structures are more appealing, right? The ones where the logs are kind of like floating in the middle of the structure, like how are they staying in there? That kind of stuff's weird, but just the typical tree breaks out here, I don't really buy into it, unfortunately. That's just my opinion. I know a lot of people are against my opinions, but I'm allowed to believe whatever I want, and so are you. And that's the beauty of it, right? As long as we don't get into arguments and we stay civil. Hard thing to do in the Bigfoot world, I know.
It's very interesting with the tree structures, and I'll tell you my experience with it. I was already in an area looking for Sasquatches that my friends had taken me to. When I spotted the first tree structure, you'll see a lot of on a lot of like Survivor Man and Todd Standing stuff. Like, you'll see that big teepee one. That was the first one that the trapper and I actually discovered. Now, the only reason that I recognized it while we were skidooing past it was because of my research online. There was all of these tree structures from Florida to Alaska. The people, researchers saying is you'll find these structures if you're in an area that has Sasquatches. Well, so yeah, they basically correlated exactly. Like, the people who took me in there didn't find the tree structures. I did. I found those. And I took another fellow in there, and he knew a little bit about them as well, and we found a bunch more. And then I found another area out there with some amazing ones. Also an area out there where the Sasquatch have been feeding on bones, and there's tooth marks on the bones. Now, I know somebody did a study on that, and I need to get some of that stuff to him. But I've had to be real quiet because I don't want these other guys going in there and turning it into a freaking circus. I don't like the idea of coming forward with anything without evidence, I mean, I can make an awful lot of claims. I can say Sasquatch bury their dead. I can say Sasquatch gift their dead. Okay? But I can't necessarily take you and show you a grave. I can't show you, where they buried one or things like that without betraying maybe somebody's confidence. And the thing is, I know that those two statements are true, but I can't prove them in a proper way, and until I can only say something like that.
I know sometimes I seem pretty skeptical, but sometimes I am, I have to maintain that. I can't just believe every little thing I hear or every little theory or piece of information someone gives me, because a lot of different people tell me a lot of different things. And it's up to me to decide and to distinguish what is legitimate and what is plausible. It's up to you guys to do the same. I mean, there's some crazy theories out there. Some people believe that the Sasquatch are from another world, or they're light beings, and change into trees and they go into trees, and I'm open to all kinds of mysteries and theories, and even the interdimensional stuff. I'm open to the theories because there's a lot of stuff we don't know about the universe, but we can't try and explain this mystery with more mysteries. You know what I mean? We need facts. We need hard evidence, unfortunately, right now.
No, basically what I do is I try to gather as much information as I can, weigh it out, but the only time that you'll actually see me lace on my boots and run out the door is when somebody says they have something physical. Then I'm on it. Which is why I had the test, the scat tested. Now the bag of hair I sent to John Bindernagel, he sent to other people who have since said they didn't get it. And unfortunately, Dr. Bindernagel passed away a few days ago. And I have another friend, Tyler Huggins, he's a researcher. He's working on that for me, and that whole bag of hair. And there was skin attached to some of it. And I know it's from a Sasquatch because I collected it myself, personally. From a Sasquatch that was actually in a trap. And it's really too bad. But on the other hand, if there is somebody who is intercepting this evidence, which I firmly believe, then it makes all the sense in the world. That was a mistake, sending all that hair in one bag. I should have sent half of it. It was a mistake. And the other thing too is anybody who is lobbying for Sasquatch DNA evidence or anything like that is the last person now that I'll send it to. I'll send it to somebody else. As a matter of fact, if I get physical evidence, there's probably about 10 different people right now that are on a list, and they have been spoken to. And if it goes public, you can rest assured they've already got their samples. It has to be that way, I don't understand why, unless somebody comes to my house and explains to me why it's being covered up and can give me a good reason that I agree with, I just wish when I worked at the Smithsonian that I knew more about this subject, because I went through the anthropology storage area. I would love to have gone back in there and talked to a couple people, but unfortunately I had just left the Smithsonian when I got into this, which is a shame. I think it was a missed opportunity for me.
Night 2. Another cold night, no activity. Time at home goes by so fast. You do the same thing every night. You watch Netflix, you have dinner, or whatever. Next thing you know, it's time for bed. You wake up in the morning and it's time for work. But when you come out here, time slows right down. And you're like, oh crap, what am I gonna do for the next 12 hours? And in the winter, it gets dark out so early, so it's like, it makes it worse. When you're alone. When you have friends with you, it's not that bad. It's a lot more tolerable, because you can just bullshit and tell jokes and stories. And it's a lot easier. A lot easier when you have people with you. Now, the people I know who've seen the males, the big males, like one of my friends who's seen quite a few of them, he says the big ones, he says they're muscled up like you wouldn't believe. Like they are just prime specimens, like super Arnold Schwarzenegger on steroids type physiques on them. And apparently it's really something to behold. Like they are so intimidating. They're just, very much shoulders, and narrower to the hips, whereas Patty had the wide hips, she looked like a female in a lot of ways if you look at the differences. So I think that, and the males are a lot bigger, a lot taller. Big tracks are like, 19 inches long. And a friend who measured a tree said one with an 18 3/4 inch footprint was 9 feet 10 inches slouching. But the big ones slouch anyways. They have that almost like a humpback appearance. You can see the break in the back even on the Patterson footage. And then some of these little photographs that I have
When I look at photographs of Sasquatches, the rounded, the break to the shoulder is one of the first things I look for. You know, not saying they don't straighten up like the Peguis tape where the one's looking up in the trees, but still, when that one looks up in the trees, you'll notice that the skin stretches from the chin to the throat. In other words, it doesn't normally have its head up, so everything stretches there. Normally it has its head down, and then its head set about intermediate between a gorilla and a human. You know, so the physical characteristics too is they tend to have like a shorter shin. When they bring their leg forward, their foot is longer, their shin is shorter, so their shin tends to be parallel to the ground when they bring their foot forward. You can't walk like that, but they do. It's right there in the film. But it's all that stuff is so subtle, and unless you've trained your eye, you don't really see it unless it's pointed out to you. It looks like a man because it's on two legs, you know. Somebody finds a skull. They think it's a human skull because it looks human, somewhat human, or very human. They're not looking at the forehead saying, well, why isn't the forehead, you know, straight up? Why is the cranium sloped backwards? You know, things like that. You would have to be knowledgeable about skulls in order to pick that up right away. Show a Sasquatch track to a foot doctor and they will tell you that's not a human foot. There is no arch. They have a flat foot and they have a mid-tarsal break. But if you look at a true Sasquatch footprint, you'll notice the indentation is on the outside of the foot, whereas our arch is on the inside of ours because we have a fixed arch. And they have a mid-tarsal break, so the foot flexes in the middle. But almost always you'll notice there's an indentation to the outside of the track. The young ones have a narrow heel. I believe you found a track. I have no doubt that that was very likely. It wasn't a bear track. I saw the picture of it. It's likely a Sasquatch track, and it wasn't a big one. You know, you find a 12-inch track, it'll have a narrow heel. You know, if you find a 15-inch track with a wide heel, it's likely a female. You see? You find a 15-inch track with a narrow heel, it's likely a male, because it's still going to get bigger. But as they get bigger, their heels widen out. But you know, the whole thing about talking like that is people have already made up their mind they don't exist, so they think you're just reaching up and pulling this stuff out of the air, you know. I have something to say about skeptical people too. It's no big deal. If you don't believe in something, that's your right. It's no big deal. Okay? But if every time somebody brings up the subject, you have to say, oh no, they're not real. Oh no, they're not real, over and over again, you're not a skeptic, you're a narcissist. Because I heard you the first time. You know, there's two types of people if you're investigating Sasquatch sightings, and that is people who've seen one and people who haven't. Okay? People who haven't, people who have, right? And the last thing you need is all those people who haven't seen one making noise so you can't hear the one person that you should be listening to, you know. I don't blame people who've never seen a Sasquatch or have never looked into it. I don't blame them for not believing they're out there. Be skeptical all you want, but keep it to yourself, you know, really. You can tell somebody once, you don't have to keep saying it over and over again. It gets really annoying. I've got a few picked out that I'm looking forward to talking to if the mystery's ever solved. It's all in fun, but I'm looking forward to it, you know. But then, I mean, take a look at John Bindernagel. He spent his life, you know, on this mystery, and he passed away a few days ago. I think it's sad. I would like to have seen him realize, you know, see the thing accepted to the world before he had to go. But a lot of really good researchers have died without it being recognized.